Okay.
Oh, lovely.
We're rolling.
Yes. And my phone is going to definitely...
Yeah.
That's going to happen. Okay. So I am at the King's College. I don't even know what this is. This is the subterranean
We have no idea where
depths.
we are. The subterranean depths of King's.
And I'm here with Josh. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Annika.
You're my second interviewee.
Nice. Sweet.
So I remember we met in the first week of the IPE master's course, and we're actually in the same class together. So I was wondering, what led you to apply to this course?
That is a good question. I think I had a bit of an existential crisis when I was applying for jobs. I did an undergrad in IR from CU, and like 3,000 people do that degree every single year. So it's really hard to distinguish yourself in the job market. So after a couple months of applying to jobs, I was like over 100 applications in, and I thought, actually I really want to like broaden my academic knowledge and just get into something that I find like really specifically interesting. And so I was looking at master's programs in the United States. I was looking at ones in the UK, and I realized like that the UK has such a competitive advantage, like as far as master's programs go, because it was about half the cost and only 1 year. But also the programs were ranked higher than a lot of the American schools that I was looking at. Of course, there's like some I applied for that I didn't get in that were also really highly ranked. But so I was looking at mainly the field of IR, like intelligence and security studies and international political economy. Okay. And I was trying to decide between those areas. And so I actually applied for all 3 programs at King's and got into them. And so then I just had to make the decision between those 3. And I think I chose international political economy because I thought it would offer me like the broadest scope of potential with a future career. Whereas I felt like if I went into intelligence and security studies, for example, that it would lead me kind of on a path towards like State Department or, down this path of sort of like government focused work. So yeah, I kind of chose IPE because I'm indecisive. But no, it's been really good so far. And I've really liked it. And I had a great seminar with you. So that was awesome. Yeah, it was kind of what led me to this decision. And then also, but a big factor in that decision was the fact that my sister was moving to London. Okay. And so we could both be studying in London together at the same time, because I hadn't lived with her for several years. And she moved out of the US and probably will stay out of the US. So it was really like kind of important to get to be around her for a while again.
What is she studying?
She's doing financial history.
Very similar to what we're doing. Yeah,
at LSE, which is like a very complicated in between finance and like history. So it's interesting. I'm not sure what she's going to do with it exactly yet, but she really likes the course.
I imagine dinner conversations are really exciting.
They're very exciting for me and her, not so much for my fiance and her boyfriend.
So where's home for you?
Home for me, I would say, is Colorado.
Okay.
I'm from outside of the Denver area, a little town called Golden. But originally I lived until I was 10 in New Mexico in Albuquerque, which is best known for Breaking Bad, and is just a really, really cool place to live, but a very challenged place, very impoverished, rough place to grow up. So honestly, I was pretty glad that we moved to Colorado. But yeah, I've been in Colorado for, just up until this, so like 14, 15 years. And I would say it's definitely home for me, but not the best place to study politics and economics.
Has your experiences of both Colorado and New Mexico helped you get to a better understanding of politics, economics?
I would say more my travel outside of those places has. New Mexico is, well, I was really from like a very young age extremely interested in politics. And like I really got super into it during Obama's first run in 2008. So I was just in like third or fourth grade. But seeing the excitement generated by him in New Mexico, I mean, it was like such a phenomena. And seeing that sort of like energy and excitement around someone like that. And then also like the recession and the Iraq War were hanging over life. Even I like noticed that as a very, young kid. So that was really like pretty formative, I would say, in like getting me more interested in that. And I actually like campaigned for Obama as a kid, and I like raised a certain amount of money for Obama, and they sent me like a letter from like the Obama campaign staff inviting me to the inauguration. But I didn't go because I was just a kid. But yeah, so I would say New Mexico, I guess in that way, played a role. Colorado itself, I wouldn't say really played a big role on like my interest in that. Colorado's a state that has a rather limited international scope because it's right in the middle of the country, and like the main focuses are kind of like domestic businesses, sales, tech, marketing, mining, like these kind of things. So it's extremely important nationally, but internationally there's not much in the way of like international organizations or like schools that really direct towards any of these fields of like journalism or diplomacy or anything like that. So I would say really me leaving Colorado was kind of because it sort of lacks these things that I was really interested in.
So after Colorado, you went to Washington to do an internship?
Yeah, so actually I was supposed to go to DC for that. That was like my first sort of like real internship, I would say. Before that, I'd worked in like the service industry and in restaurants growing up. And then I was able to get this internship through this like program kind of connected to school. And then COVID hit. So I got the internship, COVID hit, and then it was like going to be that summer. But I decided to stay in Colorado instead for that summer. Because like, why be locked down in DC if I was going to be locked down here? And it was like virtual work anyway. So yeah, I worked for this internship there and based out of DC, and it was really interesting.
So this was the Africa Faith and Justice Network.
Yes. Yeah.
What kind of like task or role did you have there?
So I worked as a full-time intern there, unpaid, which is kind of funny that that's even allowed. But my role was essentially to write pieces on certain topics that were assigned to me on Africa. Also to run this like column on the blog, which was like uplifting stories out of Africa, since there's so much like negative attention given to the continent. And then also to just assist with like any of like the advocacy that the group was doing. So the AFJN, or Africa Faith and Justice Network, is a lobbying group in DC with a pretty small staff, and I would say like a relatively limited scope. And their main funding is the Catholic Church. They also have like other funders, but their whole purpose is to sort of advance African interests as they see them to lawmakers in DC. So the focus is really like making sure that lawmakers are aware of like the aid conditionalities and those effects on African people, or to be aware of certain conflicts. So one of the things I did there was I like helped draft this letter that we were sending to certain senators so they would endorse like the formation of a human rights commission, which is supposed to facilitate like better dialogue around African human rights abuses happening on the continent. And it ended up being accepted in some form, but I sort of doubt how much impact that specific letter had.
How long did that project take?
Several weeks. But it was really interesting, and it was cool to be in that role. I think overall, just because like AFJN has a very small operation and just a few employees, they're not one of the big hitters at all in any way in DC. And they're like really lucky if they can get on a call with a lawmaker. So it's really sort of just like, they're important because like what they advocate for is important, but their overall scope is very small.
So what was the main lesson you took from that?
There was a few lessons that I took from that. I think one of the interesting things is I asked my boss, my employer, who's this guy from the Congo, spoke many languages, had been living in the US for a long time. And I said, like, what would be the ideal amount of aid given to Africa in your vision? And he was like, 0. And, which is like pretty shocking to hear because there's such a belief in the West that all this aid is really helping with development and is really good. But that was sort of when I was first introduced to like some of the problems around aid and sort of the dependencies that get formed and some of like the really negative aspects of it. I'm not sure I agree with his assessment, but that was just like a really interesting thing to hear that from someone who had been in so many parts of Africa and had such a deep knowledge of the continent. I also learned that I think money drives politics in a big way. And if you don't have money, it's going to be hard to get yourself in the room with like policymakers. And if you don't have like that scope that I was kind of alluding to earlier. So I have like big respect for the organization. I really enjoyed my time there, but they are constrained in a way. And I think if I worked there for a long time, it'd be really frustrating because you're limited. And a lot of policymakers, quite frankly, don't really care about human rights in Africa, unfortunately.
So the AFJN said that you were passionate about human rights and conflict prevention. Mm-hmm. Are there any things you're doing now at King's, as in like the modules you're taking or the dissertation you're writing, that address those issues?
Yeah, I am taking, I guess I just finished taking the in-person classes, but I'm taking 2 modules, political economy of development and post-colonial political economy. And both of those sort of have to do with like these dynamics of aid and development and power in the international system. And both have given me really interesting insights, albeit like depressing insights into these issues that I really care about. So there's been like a lot of interesting learning for me around that. And even though I was familiar with some of the concepts like neocolonialism or extractivism, it's been like, I feel like I've been able to get a way deeper knowledge of it through some of these courses. As far as conflict resolution, I would say that conflict kind of ties into a lot of these modules, but that's something that mostly like my research in that comes separate of King's and just comes through like reading stuff online and watching a lot of YouTube documentaries and stuff.
So how did you make these module choices for King's?
To be honest, it was a little bit random because I felt like some of the information was fairly limited on the modules. So first semester I did quantitative methods of political economy, which I was very challenged by, but I'm really glad I took it because it's so interesting and it totally like, I guess, introduced me to how research is conducted and like regression analysis and these more complex topics that you just can't learn from like your own study or from the internet. You really have to have like a good instructor walking you through how this works and how to do it. So that was really challenging, but I got through the module and did pretty well. So I was really excited about that. But I wanted that because I wanted some, what I call like hard skills. So not just like theory and, different thoughts around things, but really like something that I could like, okay, I can work with data now. And then my other course first semester was a global politics class because it fit my interests. And then of course we take like the IPE module. And then the way I chose the ones second semester was pretty much purely out of interest. and I wanted to know more about the theories. But I'm not going to say I was let down in any way by the modules, but I think that if I did it again, I would have chosen like one more based on interest in theory and one again based on like some hard skills. Because that's something that I feel like maybe like causal inference was one that I was looking at, or like some sort of other like research methods kind of course. So
how did you overcome the challenges in the quantitative course?
That's a good question. It was, for me, I think like I just had to just devote like time over and over again to going through these things and like familiarizing myself with the concepts over and over. But I think also the instructor was super helpful and did a great job. And then a huge component of it was working with other people. So worked really closely with Samuele, and we had like this whole group chat and just like really taking the time to like meet with people every week and work through different problems. Then we had this huge problem set at the end of the semester that we were allowed to work with other people on. And I think some people worked quite individually on that, and I feel bad for them if they did, because working with others is like absolutely the only way to get that done. So yeah, that's how I did it, and I felt really good with the results. So that was a cool moment of achievement when it seemed like for a while in the semester I was like, oh, I don't think I could do this.
Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
I've seen some of the work that you guys had to do, and honestly, I was so intimidated by the equations and the numbers.
Yeah, it's a total foreign language when you first look at it, but then once you get familiar with it, it's not too bad.
It's a great accomplishment.
No, thanks.
So aside from university modules, I hear that you're the co-founder of the Lookout Report.
Yes.
So we're going to discuss that. How did you start it?
Yeah. So classmate of ours, Ben Kwasnick, and we got to talking after the same seminar that we share. And him and I became friends really fast. And we were just talking about, we feel like, what could we do to sort of, I guess, like pursue these things that we're interested in and make something out of that. And like, we're kind of like looking at it from like the lens of like, how can we produce this semester, not just consume? And we wanted something really, I mean, a lot of the impetus was behind thinking about what is something that can distinguish ourselves in the job search, but also there was like a lot of shared interest in all the topics that we wanted to end up covering. So we first had like the idea of like a geopolitics blog. And so we made this whole website, and there was just so many barriers to entry with like problems with the domain, or like hidden fees and costs to doing stuff like that, or just technical difficulties. But we pushed through all of that and then decided to publish our work on Substack, which is sort of like OnlyFans for journalists. And then got a lot of friends and family to follow us, and then also spread that around to like the course and got more following, and then also like just quite a few random people online followed, which was really cool. And we've published articles on things like the economic resilience of Russia, to like the massive debt issues facing Japan, to things about like the coup history in Guatemala, and recently been covering like the potential for conflict between the Congo, the DRC, and Rwanda. So we've had like a ton of different areas. Ben sort of took the angle of Latin American expert because he speaks Spanish and Portuguese and has been there. I've focused more of my efforts on like covering Africa, with some coverage of Eurasia and a couple of different areas. And then we also brought in Marin and Samuele, and they've contributed a few articles as well, which were really good and really well put together.
That's awesome. Yeah. Are there any notable publications or journalists that you are inspired by?
That's a good question. personally, I really like this guy, Ryan Grimm, who he founded The Intercept, if you've heard of it. But it's sort of more of a left-leaning American publication, but he's someone who's like a real journalist. I would say what I'm doing is more analysis than journalism. But he always writes like really fantastic pieces and has like a very like measured level sort of tone in everything that he goes about. So he's like really professional. But then also what's been cool is like Ben was really interested in this guy, Tim Marshall, who wrote, what's the book called?
The one on geography.
Yeah, the one on geography, yeah. And he ended up through this venture making contacts with Tim Marshall's Reaction.life,
Oh, wow.
which is like an online publication. And so he actually was able to publish multiple articles for them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is super, super cool, and got to meet like a lot of people within that organization and sort of, like got his foot in the door as a journalist. Now he's doing something else, but I think that was a super cool experience for him. I haven't had quite the same experience in that, but I've also like met some really interesting people through this and had some cool conversations, mostly via LinkedIn. But yeah, it was really, really cool in that way. It was sort of like meet your heroes moment for him, I guess.
So when I was reading some of the articles you've written, especially the last one you wrote about the DRC, I was wondering, how do you balance objectivity and empathy when you're covering such socially sensitive topics?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question. And also, I think something that I think about a lot is not projecting that my knowledge is beyond what it is. Because like at the end of the day, I haven't been to the DRC or Rwanda, so I don't want to like speak like absolutely authoritatively about something that I'm still like just building an understanding of based on what I can find. I would say with objectivity and such, we wanted to keep this pretty objective because we wanted to have like a broad appeal to, but we also didn't want to limit ourselves in any ways. And we thought that we could cover these topics in like an objective way. And especially I think conflicts or problems that you don't have any sort of like personal stake in or connection to, maybe you are like the right person to talk about it because you can kind of just analyze both sides. So I have a lot of opinions and a lot of like, I'm quite passionate about a lot of political issues, and I try to keep that mostly out of my writing. Or if I work it in, I want it to also sort of like balance out and try to give like both sides. So with the Rwanda DRC article, I like wrote like sort of like the compelling, persuasive side of like the DRC's argument and then of Rwanda's, and said like, this is kind of how I see the two arguments, which both have their own merits in different ways. And I mean, also, I think like in general, there is like a tone within all our pieces that is relatively pro human rights and democratic values to an extent. But I think that I think if you read it, you can understand that, but it's not like overwhelming where we're just like sort of like finger wagging at Putin or, Azerbaijan's Aliyev or whoever else, because at the end of the day, we're trying to do like a report and not like convince people one way or the other on a certain issue.
That's really cool. I think one of the hardest parts about studying IPE is not only understanding the complex theories and issues, but being able to convey that in a simple way, in a way that people who aren't studying our course would understand.
Yeah.
I think that is an incredible skill, which you've shown time and time and again.
Oh, thank you.
In your articles, because when I first started, I didn't know much about IPE. But after reading the articles on the Lookout Report, it helped me gain more of an understanding of what's going on in the world that isn't, covered daily. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing.
Well, thanks. I'm glad you enjoy it. What we try to do is, to show these like geopolitical dynamics. So outside of just like, I think with Twitter or with reporting nowadays, a lot of times you just see the outcome of a situation or like the direct actors involved. So like Azerbaijan versus Armenia in a conflict. And it can seem like limited in scope. And what we try to do is expand that scope and say, who are the other actors involved here? What does Russia have to do with this? What does the US and China have to do with this? What do the sanctions that were imposed on Ukraine have to do with this situation? Sort of like, yeah, highlight those geopolitical dynamics. I think it's been a little difficult to, I feel like some of the academics, especially here at King's, are so much more knowledgeable on certain things that we write about. And so I feel like for some of them, our writing might be a bit like reductive, but we're trying to at the same time like make it approachable for other people. And so like I run these pieces by like friends of mine who aren't especially interested in these things and see what they think of it. If they say this part was confusing to me, I was like, okay, what can I do to make that better? And I think it's pretty approachable. I think it still is something that I wanted to write for people who are interested in these things. So at the end of the day, it's still a bit unapproachable in that sense, but that's kind of part of the goal. But yeah, so it's been going good. I've really enjoyed it and hope we can write more pieces that get such accreditation from you.
Do you have any future plans or steps that you want to take with this?
For the time being, I think I'm going to take a little break from it just because I've got a lot coming up with essays. I've got sort of like a couple different job opportunities popping up and internships and stuff. So I'm trying to focus on those priorities first. But there's a couple of really interesting topics I'd like to cover, like the crisis in Haiti, among other things. So we'll see what I can do in the next couple of weeks, but I just got to balance because once I get started on an article, I just spend so much time writing it. And it's probably taken me out of some of my academic commitments during this semester.
So after the master's at King's, do you have any plans or aspirations?
Yeah. Well, first off, I'm most likely going to be moving back to the United States. That's just something my fiance and I have talked about. And I think a decision that we share, and sort of where we want to build our life and my professional life going forward. Although I really love London and love the time I've had here. So kind of got a plan around that. But luckily for me, there's a lot of jobs in these various fields. So I'm kind of looking at a couple different things right now. I'm looking at journalism as a potential opportunity. So I'm trying to see where I can write pieces for us. I've been pitching pieces to people, seeing, can I get my foot in the door there? Other than that, I'll keep doing my like journalism on the side, which I like. But I've also been looking at sort of like political risk consultancies.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so just experts in these things that I'm so interested in, they come in and give companies or even governments advice and understanding of like different dynamics. And so looking into that, doing a little bit of contract work with someone who works in that right now, which has really been quite interesting. And then other than that, I'm also looking at like international organizations. I'm looking at job opportunities and federal government back in the United States. But I'm trying to balance many different things that I want out of a career and direct myself towards that, because I am someone who has very strong notions of what is politically right and like correct. And so I don't want to work for an organization that doesn't represent my values. But at the same time, I need to make money and have a salary that can support, me and my fiance and the life that we want to have in the future, because I do want to own a home someday. So I'm just trying to balance all these things out and figure out what the next couple steps are. But so far, the job process has actually been, at times very frustrating, but hopeful. And I have some interesting leads. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm hoping it all comes together, and we'll see. And I'm also trying to set my expectations, knowing that like I am a young career person, and oftentimes you don't get your dream job right out of the bat, and you have to really wait and build towards it.
What advice would you give to prospective students to our course?
I would say the most important thing that I've ever learned in this regard is show, don't tell. So like a lot of people, the mistake they make going into, whether if it's like with resumes or interviews or whatever else, they tell the interviewer about, oh, I'm super passionate about this, or I'm super interested in this. And that doesn't give, like the interviewer is like, okay, sure, but like a lot of people are. And some people try to say, well, I'm so interested in this that I did an undergrad or a master's in this. And what I've always like tried to do, since I heard this advice on YouTube like a couple years ago, is create something and then show them that. So when I got in between my undergrad and my master's, I worked as it was called like a grants and partnerships IT business analyst, is like super long name, junior. But for the role, the job is drafting grant proposals for either for the federal government or for the state government, and making the argument that our county needs this money for whatever XYZ. And so it's quite complicated. There's like a legal side to it, but the whole job is just essentially like forming partnerships and writing grant proposals. And so for that job, when I saw it advertised, when I sent in my CV and my resume, or my CV and my cover letter, I also sent in a like completed grant draft application for like a theoretical EV project. So I said like, or not EV, but I think it was like electric bicycles. So I said, our county needs like electric bicycles that are discounted, that we can put up like publicly and people can rent and check them out. So I wrote this like whole like 5-page, sort of just like showing that I could do the work that is going to be required. And I didn't have any experience with that kind of thing prior to that. So I just had to do a bunch of research online. What did these things look like? What does a grant proposal look like? What are the sections? Used like ChatGPT to help me as well, structure it, and then just wrote it out. And of course, it's like, it wasn't perfect and it wasn't exactly what I would be doing. But when they saw that, like they told me later, the people that hired me, they were like, that was so above and beyond. We really like saw that like initiative that you took there. And from that point on, like we had the interviews with you and a few others, but it was sort of decided by them that this would be the person they wanted for the role. So that's sort of part of the thought process behind the Lookout report as well. To say, to a job, for example, like say you're doing Africa research or something like that. Say like not just, oh, I really am interested in Africa and have read a lot of books on Africa, but to say, actually, I've written this piece on this specific thing in Africa, and that has led me to this or whatever else. And so I just think that people need to sort of expand their creativity and like their comfort zone in applying for things. And it's not just the names of like whatever internships you've had or whatever job experience you've had, but it's also like showing that extra initiative and that extra step. But that's what's worked for me. That's the advice that I would give people.
That's incredible. I didn't know you wrote a grant proposal. Like the initiative you had to have to do that is, I'm really blown away with that.
But it's like, for me, I think it's just like a necessity of the job hunt, because I mean, and I kind of like learned from failing, because I just was applying to hundreds of jobs literally before I got one. And sort of realizing that you're just getting fed into this like algorithmic pit. And so a lot of people, what they do to get out of that is they try to meet people on LinkedIn, form some like networking and connections, which I think is valuable as well. Even that's becoming kind of formulaic. So yeah, if you can, I mean, that is really important as well. But creating something for whatever job you're going for, I think is important. And if you can get it in front of someone, then it's great. And sometimes, like I had a couple jobs where I did like make stuff for them, like primarily for that, and didn't even get a response email. So that's, that sucks. But I think that's the way to do it personally. I think that's the best method to succeed.
That's incredible. Thank you. So one last question for you. Is there anything this summer that you're looking forward to do?
Yes. Well, writing the dissertation is going to be a lot of the summer, but I'm planning a trip back home for a week, which will be really nice. I haven't seen my little siblings in a long time now, and a lot of my other family and friends, so that'll be really cool. Then other than that, I really want to go to Greece and Albania.
Nice.
So I'm going to see if we can make that happen with like a trip with my fiance and I, and then maybe also her sister will come out for that. So that'll be really cool.
That's really nice.
But yeah, those are the things I'm looking forward to this summer, other than, of course, the dissertation.
Well, good luck for the dissertation.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for the time you're taking today.